Today we're starting Unit 6, Post-War America. Unit 6, Notes Number 1. The impact of the GI Bill of Rights. By the summer of 1946, about 10 million men and women had been released from the armed forces. To help ease veterans' return to civilian life, Congress passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or the GI Bill of Rights, in 1944. The GI Bill guaranteed a year's worth of unemployment benefits while job hunting, offered low-interest loans to buy homes or start businesses, and paid for tuition to go to college. So the whole point of the GI Bill is to help veterans adjust back to life, find a job, find employment, offer them an easy transition. Returning veterans faced a severe housing shortage. In response to the housing crisis, developers like William Lovett used efficient assembly line methods to mass produce homes. These techniques were used to build small residential communities surrounding cities called suburbs. These homes would look exactly alike and create a small town feel within these planned suburbs. So, welcome to suburban life. And so, here's an example of Levitt Town, what was designed by William Levitt. And there are these mass-produced tract homes, sometimes called, these cookie cutter homes. And so, most of these houses would have a very similar design. So, they would all require the same type of products. They would all be built at the very same time. So, all of the foundations would be laid, at one time. All of the frames would go up. And these were usually like 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 3 bedrooms, 2-bath type homes that we began to see develop in the 1950s. If you look, around Downey, Lakewood, Whittier, you can see lots of these type of neighborhoods that kind of all the homes look slightly alike. Now, through remodeling, they look different, but that was the idea of these mass-produced homes, that we create these new communities on the outskirts of cities. Redefining the family. Tension created by changes in men's and women's roles after the war contributed to a rising divorce rate. Traditionally, men were breadwinners and the heads of households, while women were expected to stay home. During the war, about 8 million women entered the workforce. These women supported their families and made important household decisions. Many were reluctant to give up their newfound independence when their husbands returned. After World War II, the U.S. converted from a wartime to a peacetime economy. Defense contracts were canceled, and unemployment increased as veterans joined the laid-off defense workers in search for jobs. Prices also began to skyrocket in 1946. Once the Office of Price Administration price controls had ended, Congress would eventually have to reestablish controls similar to the wartime controls on prices, wages, and rents. So within this post-war America, there were a lot of adjustments that would have to be made, specifically with kind of the roles of men and women, because women stepped out of kind of their established roles and kind of saw that there were other things that they could do. There's also just that adjustment from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. And so that transition took a while before it kind of leveled off. So let's stop and think. What difficulties did returning soldiers face after World War II? Well, the first part is just adjusting from being gone for so many years, getting reacquainted with their families, then the struggle to find jobs, because not only are they looking for work, many laid off other employees are looking for work. They did get some help with the GI Bill, so if they couldn't find a job, maybe they can go to college, they could take out a loan, start a business. So they did have kind of a lot of options for them. But just that transition back into life was definitely difficult for a lot of these soldiers. Suburban lifestyle. Most Americans worked in cities, but fewer of them lived there. New highways and the availability and affordability of automobiles and gasoline made commuting to work possible. For many people, the suburbs embodied the American dream of an affordable single-family house, good schools, a safe, healthy environment for children, and friendly neighbors. By the 1960s, every large city was surrounded by suburbs. And suburbs just means like in the city is the urban environment, so suburban, it's suburbs. As soldiers returned from war and settled into family life, they contributed to an unprecedented population explosion known as the baby boom. During the late 1940s through the early 1960s, the birth rate soared. Um, and this resulted in the largest generation in the nation's history, hence the term baby boomer. So, anyone born during that generation is referred to as a baby boomer. And if you think about it, with so many men fighting the war from like the early 1940s until almost 1946, there's a whole period where people, didn't see their husbands or they had to wait to get married. So by the time the war is done, everyone wants to get married, settle down, have children. So you really start to see an unprecedented amount of children being born. Other factors that contributed to this: the reunion of husband and wives, decreasing marriage age, economic confidence. People felt that they had a job, they can support a larger family. Advances in medicine and childcare. Among the medical advances that saved hundreds of thousands of children's lives was the discovery of drugs to fight and prevent childhood disease such as typhoid fever. Dr. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine for a crippling disease known as polio. Polio was responsible for the deaths of many children, and if children did not die from it, they could end up paralyzed from this disease. And so, with this new vaccine, it basically eradicated polio. So, people just don't get it anymore. And we start to see more and more vaccines after this time being developed and given to children to prevent them from getting these types of diseases that would have um, increased childhood mortality. So the baby boom had a tremendous impact not only on childcare, but on the American economy and educational system as well. Toy sales reached $1.25 billion in 1958. Increases in student enrollment causes overcrowding and teacher shortages. So we began to see children, and then later in the 1950s, teenagers as these new demographics that companies, businesses want to attract. Women's roles. So the role of homemaker and mother was glorified in popular magazines, movies, and TV programs. However, some women spoke out about their discontentment, the fact that they were not happy within these roles. They felt isolated, bored, unfulfilled, felt that they were limited on what they could do. They couldn't, go reach their full potential. Betty Friedan, who's pictured here, wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963, where she described this problem, the fact that America highlights, society puts so much pressure on women to be the perfect mother, the perfect homemaker, but doesn't really support them if they want to kind of step out of that box. And this was something that a lot of women, these feelings that a lot of women at this time shared. So let's stop and think, how did the baby boom impact life in the 1950s? So we began to see kind of just this changing dynamic. We began to see more people wanting to settle down and also increasing to that suburban boom of the housings, the demand for more childhood kind of activities, toys, just kind of a whole shift in what the American dream means. The automobile culture. Suburban living made owning a car a necessity. Most new suburbs did not offer public transportation, and people had to drive to their jobs in the cities. Local, state, and governments built roads linking major cities. The Interstate Highway Act in 1956 authorized the building of 41,000 miles of expressways. As the auto industry boomed, it stimulated production and provided jobs in other areas. It also resulted in an economic gulf between suburban and urban dwellers. So people that could afford to move out of the cities and buy a nice spacious house with a yard did. But within the cities, you still had maybe people that couldn't afford to leave. Consumerism. By the mid 1950s, nearly 60% of Americans were members of the middle class, about twice as many as before World War II. They wanted and had the money to buy increasing numbers of products. Consumerism, buying material goods, came to be equated with success. New products were constantly appearing on the market. Consumer demand would increase. With more leisure time to fill, people invested in recreational items. They bought televisions, tape recorders, and record players. Many consumers made their purchases on credit. Many large items were bought on the installment plan and made regular payments over time. And the advertising industry capitalized on consumerism. So everyone wanted to live this American dream, have a refrigerator, have a car, have a television, live, go out on long drives. And so it definitely was this picturesque lifestyle that advertising tried to promote during the 1950s. So let's stop and think. How did the buying habits of Americans in the 1950s change? So it's almost very similar to what we saw in the 1950s, where, we just recently finished World War II, where we were rationing, the 1930s, where things were scarce. So now the economy is booming, so people want to kind of buy things that they can afford. They're doing much better than they had in many years prior. So we're seeing them spend money on luxury items, leisure time activities, things that they maybe normally wouldn't spend their money on, buying additional clothes, casual clothes, nicer clothes. So we're just seeing Americans really kind of buying into consumerism. A new phrase comes about, the keeping up with the Joneses, wanting to have all of the new things and what your neighbors have. So we really see the 1950s really starting to change American society. So that's it for the notes. You want to make sure to go back and do all of your key terms.